He built an empire above the clouds, but couldn't fill the silence in his heart. In a glass penthouse overlooking the Denver skyline, Ethan Monroe had everything the world said he should want: success, wealth, influence. Yet behind those floor-to-ceiling windows, he lived a life measured in deadlines and empty dinners. Until one quiet afternoon, he asked his assistant a question that would change both of their lives forever. "Would you come with me to the gala?" It was meant to be a simple invitation, a gesture of gratitude, maybe even loneliness. But that night, when Claire Bennett walked into the ballroom, every whisper in the room turned into a judgment, and every glance became a test of who truly belonged. What happens when a woman from modest beginnings steps into a world built on power and pretense? Can sincerity survive in a place where everything, even love, has a price tag? And what if the only person who sees your worth is the one everyone says you shouldn't love? Stay with us, because this is not just a love story. It's a story about dignity, courage, and the quiet rebellion of being yourself. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin. A lonely millionaire took his assistant to a ball, and everything changed. The city of Denver still slept beneath a pale morning haze. From the 72nd floor of his glass-walled penthouse, Ethan Monroe stood motionless, watching the first thin streaks of light touch the peaks of the Rockies. Down below, traffic lights blinked in patterns that looked almost deliberate, tiny sparks of life in a world that no longer surprised him. He lifted a mug from the counter. One sip. Cold. He hadn't even noticed the time pass. Emails glowed on the screen beside him, hundreds of them. Investors, engineers, public relations requests. He could answer everyone before sunrise if he wanted. He could also ignore them all, and the world would keep spinning, powered by Monroe Innovations, the empire he had built from a single rented garage 15 years ago. Success, it turned out, came with silence, the kind that echoed in every marble hallway of his home. He turned toward the bonsai tree on his desk, a gift from a retired mentor years ago. Its leaves had turned brittle at the edges, curling inward as if retreating from life. He filled the small watering can and let a few drops fall onto the dry soil. "You and I," he whispered. "We've both been cared for by machines and forgotten by people." The hum of the refrigerator answered him. Nothing else. For a moment, his reflection in the window startled him. The crisp suit, the clean jawline, the eyes that had seen too many contracts and not enough kindness. He looked successful. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had everything except peace. A flashback rose uninvited the living room of his old house 3 years ago. His wife, Emily, stood near the door holding a small suitcase. Her voice had trembled, not with anger, but with defeat. "You love your company more than yourself, Ethan, and I'm tired of living in its shadow." He had said nothing then. Silence had been easier than truth. Back in the present, he exhaled slowly and turned toward the skyline. The mountains caught the rising sun, glowing like molten gold. He wondered what it would feel like to climb one of them again, not in a helicopter, not in designer boots, but the way he did as a boy, when life still smelled of pine and possibility. A soft electronic chime interrupted the thought. The elevator. Right on time, Claire Bennett stepped into the room with her usual quiet precision. Her beige trench coat was still dotted with rain, her hair pulled back in a loose knot. In one hand, she carried a leather folder. In the other, a small umbrella that dripped politely into the hallway mat. "Good morning, Mr. Monroe," she said, her tone professional but never cold. "The new investor brief is ready, and your 9 o'clock call has been rescheduled for 10. There's also a message from Senator Davis's office about the sustainability panel." Ethan nodded. "Thank you, Claire." He noticed the faint redness at the tip of her fingers from the cold morning air. She moved efficiently across the open floor, placing the folder on his desk beside the bonsai. Her eyes caught the wilted branches, still not thriving. He smiled, a small curve that almost surprised him. Apparently, even technology can't fake sunlight. Maybe it just needs attention, she replied softly. It's hard to grow when everything around you is steel and glass. He looked at her, really looked how she stood with effortless poise, how her words carried more empathy than most board meetings combined. Maybe you're right, he said. She adjusted her glasses, not noticing his lingering gaze. I'll get your coffee refreshed. Do you want the Kenyan roast today? Yes, thank you. When she left, the apartment felt colder again. He stared at the door, listening to the echo of her footsteps fade into the private elevator. Then, slowly, he returned to the window. Denver was fully awake now, sirens in the distance, airplanes tracing silver lines across a pale blue sky. The world moved, and still. Inside this penthouse, time stood still. He thought of the coming week, of the endless meetings and the one event circled in red on his digital calendar, the Children's Health Foundation annual ball. He had sponsored it for years, donating millions toward pediatric research. Every December, he showed up, shook hands, smiled for photographs, then left before dessert. Charity, for most people in that ballroom, was another form of networking. He hated that. But expectation was a powerful leash. He closed his eyes for a moment and listened to the quiet hum of the city far below. He wanted something real again, something unscripted. The thought startled him. He couldn't remember the last time he had wanted anything that couldn't be scheduled. The elevator chimed once more. Claire reappeared with his coffee. Steam curled above the porcelain like a living thing. She set it down carefully. Do you need anything else? Ethan looked at her for a moment before answering. No, that's all. But even as he said it, part of him knew it wasn't true. She turned to go, and he caught himself saying, Claire. She paused. Yes, sir. He hesitated. The question forming in his mind was not the kind that belonged in an office. He swallowed it. Nothing. Thank you. Her smile was small but sincere. All right. I'll be downstairs if you need me. When the elevator doors closed, the silence that followed felt different, not empty, but waiting. He looked again at the bonsai. Tiny beads of water glistened on its fragile leaves. Maybe sunlight wasn't the only thing missing. The city outside shimmered brighter now, clouds dissolving into pure blue. He pressed his palm against the cool glass, feeling the faint vibration of traffic below. For a man who could control almost everything, he suddenly realized how little of his own life he had chosen. Somewhere deep inside, a thought began to take shape, small, daring, unfamiliar. Maybe, for once, he would stop letting other people decide what was appropriate. He turned toward his desk, toward the invitation for the gala that lay unopened beneath a pile of reports. He picked it up, read it once, and then smiled to himself. A whisper of possibility moved through the room, light as mountain air. He didn't know it yet, but her quiet presence would soon shatter his loneliness. The morning light in Colorado Springs was softer than in Denver, less steel, more sky. In a modest second-floor apartment on the corner of Palmer Avenue, Claire Bennett stood by the kitchen sink, watching the steam rise from her coffee. Outside, the neighborhood stirred awake, a school bus rumbled past, a dog barked. The smell of rain clung to the pavement. Her apartment was small, but carefully kept books arranged by color, a framed photo of her family on the shelf, a quilt her mother had sewn decades ago folded neatly across the couch. The air carried the faint scent of lavender and detergent. Claire liked mornings like this, quiet, predictable, kind. She didn't need luxury to feel secure. What she needed was purpose. And for the last 3 years, that purpose had been working for Ethan Monroe. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a reminder train to Denver. 6:20 a.m. She moved with practiced efficiency, dishes washed, lunch packed, bag checked twice. Before locking up, she turned off the single lamp by the couch, leaving the room dim but peaceful. In the next room, her mother, Margaret Bennett, was awake, sitting in a recliner by the window, knitting with slow, careful motions. The oxygen machine hummed softly beside her. "Morning, sweetheart," Margaret said, smiling. "Morning, Mom," Claire replied, adjusting the blanket over her mother's knees. "You don't have to get up this early." "Habit," Margaret said. "Besides, I like watching you go. Reminds me I raised someone responsible." Claire kissed her forehead. "Don't forget to take your medication after breakfast." "Bossy, just like your father," her mother teased. "He'd be proud, you know?" The words always landed like a small ache in Claire's chest. Her father, a high school history teacher, had passed away 10 years ago, leaving her with his sense of duty and his quiet melancholy. She scribbled a note on the counter for her younger brother, Noah, who was asleep after a late night studying architecture. "Don't skip class," left lunch in the fridge. Then she stepped out into the cool dawn. The drive to the train station took 15 minutes. Claire preferred the rhythm of the early commute, the predictable stops, the murmurs of strangers, the landscape shifting from pine forests to the city skyline. She used the hour-long train ride to review schedules, answer early emails, and occasionally watch the mountains roll by like old friends. At 7:55, she arrived at Monroe Innovations. The building rose from downtown Denver like a tower of light and glass. Inside, everything gleamed chrome, marble, touchscreen panels. Claire's ID badge flashed green. "Good morning, Ms. Bennett," the security guard greeted. "Morning, Tom." By the time most employees had arrived, Claire had already sorted 3 meeting agendas, flagged potential budget issues, and replied to overnight inquiries from the Tokyo office. Efficiency was her armor, organization, her language. Colleagues respected her not just for competence, but for her empathy. She remembered birthdays, asked about people's kids, brought coffee to the exhausted interns. When tension rose in meetings, she had a way of lowering it, like sunlight through storm clouds. At exactly 8:30, she brought Ethan his morning espresso and briefing documents. He was already at his desk, posture straight, gaze focused. She admired him for that, the discipline, the way he seemed untouched by chaos. But she also sensed something else beneath it, something hollow. When he looked up and said, "Thank you, Claire," she smiled politely and turned away before he could see the faint flush on her cheeks. Their worlds, she knew, were galaxies apart. He lived in penthouses and private jets. She balanced grocery receipts and medical bills. Still, she couldn't deny a strange loyalty to him. It wasn't admiration for his wealth. It was the way he carried quiet integrity, the way he never raised his voice, even when under pressure. He was a man who seemed lonely, though he would never admit it. By noon, the office buzzed with activity. Claire coordinated a last-minute meeting change, printed revised contracts, and handled a vendor issue that could have delayed an entire project. When she finally returned to her desk, her lunch chicken salad from home was still untouched. She looked at the small digital photo frame beside her keyboard. It cycled through family pictures, her mother smiling under a Christmas tree, Noah in his graduation gown, the 3 of them standing beside an old blue Ford. Those were the reasons she worked the way she did. Her mother's medication alone cost more than her rent. Every paycheck went somewhere necessary. Luxury was not the point. Stability was. Her phone pinged a new company memo. She opened it absent-mindedly while sipping cold coffee. Subject: Annual Children's Health Foundation Ball. Attendance and representation. She scrolled through. The event would be hosted at the Brown Palace Hotel next Saturday. Black tie, press coverage, donor recognition. Department heads were expected to attend. Assistants, of course, were not. Claire smirked. "People like me don't belong in rooms like his," she murmured under her breath. Yet she couldn't help picturing at the chandeliers, the polished marble floors, the orchestra. She imagined herself in that world, just for a moment. It was a daydream she didn't allow often. Her email tone chimed again another message, this time directly from the executive floor. From Ethan Monroe. Subject: A quick question. Her pulse skipped. He rarely emailed her personally during business hours. He usually called through internal channels. She clicked it open. "Claire, Are you free for a few minutes this afternoon? I'd like to discuss something regarding next Saturday's event. E.M. She blinked. Once, twice. The cursor blinked back like an invitation. The gala. The one she'd just dismissed as not her world. She felt a quiet unease stir in her stomach. What could he possibly want to discuss logistics? Maybe scheduling or something else. The thought drifted through her mind before she could stop it. No. Don't be ridiculous. Still. The idea lingered, delicate and dangerous. She leaned back in her chair, looking out the window toward the distant horizon, where the mountains met the clouds. The train tracks she traveled every day glimmered faintly in the sun. Somewhere between those peaks and the glass tower she worked in, two lives, hers and his, existed in parallel lines that were never meant to touch. But fate, like Denver weather, had a way of changing fast, and that single email was the first gust of wind. The conference room was a cathedral of glass and light floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Denver skyline, a long walnut table, a bouquet of cables hidden beneath polished wood. Morning traffic flickered far below like restless fireflies. Inside, the temperature was perfect. The mood was not. "Moving on," said the chief financial officer, flipping to a chart. "If we accelerate phase 2 by 6 weeks, we can leverage winter demand curves and stop." Ethan Monroe's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like cold air. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, the kind of posture that made people choose their next words carefully. The grid readiness in Pueblo is still behind. We push, we break, we pay. Silence. Someone coughed, pens hovered at the far end. Claire Bennett sat with her notepad and a tablet, tracking numbers, calendaring follow-ups. She didn't interrupt or fidget. When people became tense, she became still, as if calm could be contagious if held long enough. The CFO cleared his throat. "Understood. We'll adjust the timeline." "Good," Ethan said. He glanced at the window, then back at the room. "That's all for now?" Chairs slid, laptops clicked shut. People filed out with that subtle speed professionals use when they're not certain whether they've pleased or disappointed the boss. Claire stayed seated, waiting until the last footstep faded down the hall. She began collecting stray reports, aligning them into a clean stack, the small rituals straightening, sorting, returning pens to their cup-stitched order back into the space. Ethan didn't move. He watched the city. Then he watched her. "Claire," he said at last. She looked up. "Yes." "Mr. Monroe, closed the door. Please." She did. The click sounded louder than it should have. For a moment, he studied the grain of the table, as if the right words might be written there. Then, very slowly, as though he were stepping onto ice, he said, "I want to ask you something that isn't standard." Her heartbeat quickened, though her expression did not. "All right." He folded his hands. "Next Saturday, the Children's Health Foundation ball. Would you join me?" Time didn't stop. It simply became heavy. Her pen stayed poised above the notepad. "Sir, wouldn't that be unusual?" "Yes," he said, "it would." She searched his face for the part that might be a joke. There wasn't one. Ethan was many things brilliant, contained, exacting but never careless with dignity. His or anyone else's. May I ask why she said the word soft, careful? Ethan exhaled, a small, almost private sigh. "Because I need someone real beside me." He didn't look away when he said it. The line hung between them, delicate as blown glass. She felt its honesty first, then the danger in it, the way sincerity could be mistaken for something else in a world that measured worth by optics. "Mr. Monroe," she began, then stopped. The room felt warmer. Her throat felt dry. "If that choice is about appearances, I'm not—" "It isn't," he said, too quickly. He tempered his tone. "It isn't about a photo. It isn't about a headline. It's about the night, about the cause." He leaned back. "Most people I could bring would see a ballroom. You would see the kids. You'd ask the right questions. You'd listen. Color rose faintly in her cheeks. Compliments from him were rare, earned, dangerous. I appreciate your trust, she said, but I'm your assistant. There are boundaries. I know, he replied. I've thought about that. I don't want to blur lines. I don't want you to feel compromised. He gave the smallest smile, the kind that belonged only to private conversations. Frankly, I'm the one who's nervous. The confession startled her more than the invitation. Nervous. The word didn't fit the man who could stop a room with a breath. Yet here it was, simple and unvarnished. She rested her hands on the stack of reports to anchor herself. People in that room, some of them will make assumptions. They always do, he said. They'll make them about me. I know, and about you. He nodded once. I know. She searched his face again. Not one twitch of calculation, no hint of pity, only a steadiness that, if she let herself name it, felt like respect. What about your friends, she asked. The ones from the country club. They will, he said, a single syllable with the weight of experience. They'll laugh, they'll imply, they'll throw words like charity around, and not the kind that helps children. His jaw eased. I don't bring them to the office for a reason. The city stretched blue and bright beyond the glass. A plane sketched a thin white line across the sky. In her peripheral vision, Claire saw her reflection, professional, poised. The simple bun at the nape of her neck, the navy dress she wore when serious was required. She saw a woman who managed crises before they started. She also saw a girl from Palmer Avenue who still counted coupons when the month went long. People like me don't belong in rooms like his, she had said to herself 100 times. Now, the room was inviting her in. She set the pen down very gently. If I came, she said, choosing each word with care, I would come as your colleague, not a placeholder, not a social pawn. Something softened in his eyes. Gratitude, maybe recognition. I wouldn't ask you for anything less. Her hands were steady now, her voice, too, and I would need to prepare. I want to know the programs funded this year, the families helped, the clinics underserved. I want details. He nodded, almost relieved to be in the terrain of facts again. I'll have the foundation send over their latest reports and their guest list. Not the guest list, she said. The volunteer roster, the people who do the work. A corner of his mouth lifted. Of course. Silence. Not the heavy kind, the living kind. I haven't said yes, she added. I noticed, he said. May I think about it, as long as you need? She straightened the stack of papers again, as if the small order could steady the larger disorder gathering around her. She pictured her mother's oxygen machine beside the recliner, Noah's sketchbook splayed across the kitchen table. Rent, medication, tuition, this life she had built with careful hands. The ballroom felt like a world that could shake it loose. Why me, she asked finally. Almost a whisper. He didn't hesitate. Because when the room goes loud, you listen. Because you look people in the eye. Because your presence makes other people better. He paused, as if weighing whether to say the last part. He did. Because I trust you. Trust. The word landed like a hand on her shoulder. Warm, steady, unassuming. She looked down at her notepad. The page was blank. She had written nothing since he asked. It occurred to her that there were moments in life when documentation was secondary to decision. Okay, she said, surprising herself with the shape of the syllables. I'll consider it. And, if I go, we set expectations clearly. Agreed. And if anyone asks who I am, we tell them the truth. He tilted his head slightly. Which is, I'm the person who knows how to find you when you disappear into a spreadsheet. He almost laughed, not fully. Enough. She rose, collected the reports, and placed one copy in front of him. Your 2 o'clock will want to push $12 million onto the R&D line. You'll want to ask about maintenance funding for rural installs. They don't expect you to. Noted, he said. She reached for the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. Mr. Monroe? Yes, if I go. I'll wear something simple. His eyes warmed. That will be more than enough. She nodded once and stepped into the hallway. The door closed softly behind her. Inside the room, Ethan exhaled and leaned back. The city looked different now, less like a painting, more like a place a person might live. He slid the foundation invitation from beneath a folder and rested his fingers on the embossed crest. That simple question had drawn a line neither of them were ready to cross. And yet, somewhere between caution and courage, he had asked, somewhere between doubt and dignity, she might say yes. Outside, the day went on emails, handshakes, the sturdy rhythm of industry. Inside, a quieter engine had started, running on something rarer than ambition. Not sunlight, not automation, something human. The late afternoon sun spilled across the emerald lawns of the Denver Country Club, turning the tennis courts into sheets of gold. Laughter drifted from the patio, polished laughter, the kind that came easily to men who had never worried about invoices or consequences. Ethan Monroe stood at the edge of the court, racket in hand, his shirt sleeves rolled up, sweat glinting at his temple. His opponent, Marcus Hale, served hard, sending the ball spinning toward him like a challenge. Ethan returned it with clean precision. Still can't beat me. Hale, he said, breathless but steady. Marcus grinned, panting. That's because you've got corporate discipline. I've got charm. On the sidelines, Robert Klein tan, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, clapped slowly. Gentlemen, you're both tragically past your prime. The game ended with laughter, towels, and chilled water from a waiting attendant. They sank into the shade, the trio that had been bound by business and habit more than friendship. Ethan had known Marcus and Robert since his university years. They were the kind of men who believed the world worked better when it looked good on paper. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his Rolex catching the light. So, Ethan, he began, casual but sharp. Who's the lucky lady you're bringing to the foundation ball next weekend? Don't tell me you're still flying solo. The board might think you've taken a vow of chastity. Robert chuckled. Don't ruin the man's mystique. Marcus, the lonely billionaire image plays well in the press. Ethan reached for his towel, wiping his hands. Actually, he said evenly, I'll have company this year. Oh, Marcus arched an eyebrow. Finally, who's the brave soul? Please tell me it's not another senator's daughter. Ethan hesitated just long enough for both men to notice. Claire Bennett, he said. The name meant nothing to them at first. Then recognition hit. Robert blinked. Your assistant Marcus nearly choked on his water. Wait, Claire. The Claire. The one who takes your calls and scolds me about security clearance. He laughed, short and incredulous. You're joking. I'm not, Ethan said simply. The silence that followed was louder than the laughter had been. Robert leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Ethan, you do realize this is the foundation gala we're talking about? The social event of the season. Governors, CEOs, donors with names that buy respect just by existing. And you're bringing no offense, a staff member. Ethan met his gaze without flinching. I'm bringing someone who understands why the foundation matters. Marcus whistled low. You're serious. I am. Marcus glanced toward Robert, then back at Ethan. You can't do that. Why not? Because optics. My friend. Optics. Marcus waved his hand dramatically. These people, their egos have their own tax brackets. You walk in with your assistant, and the whispers will start before you hit the coat check. Robert nodded, tone cooling into something almost paternal. He's right. The gala's about influence. You bring someone of equal footing, someone who complements your position, not a subordinate. Ethan's jaw tightened. Claire's not a subordinate. She's my colleague. Marcus laughed again, softer now, as if humoring a child. Come on. Ethan, you've built an empire out of reason. Don't tell me you've gone sentimental, Robert added smoothly. We're just looking out for you. You know how your mother is about these things. Lydia still believes who you stand next to is a statement. That landed like a small blade between the ribs. Lydia Monroe, ever the social architect. She'd hosted fundraisers since the Reagan years, each event a tableau of influence and hierarchy. Her guest lists were battlegrounds disguised as galas. Marcus leaned in. You show up with your assistant, and Lydia will think you've lost your mind, or worse, your standards. Ethan's tone cooled. My mother's opinion stopped shaping my choices a long time ago. Sure, Marcus said, until she calls the Wall Street Journal's society columnist to fix your image. Robert's voice softened, less mocking now, more cautious. Ethan, no one's questioning your motives, but the board's watching. Investors read those social pages. You bring her, and they'll see something, a relationship, a scandal, a weakness. It's unfair, but it's real. Ethan set down his water bottle and stood. If perception is the price of honesty, then so be it. Marcus sighed, spoken like a man who's never had to answer to stockholders. I answer to conscience first, Ethan said quietly. Robert exchanged a look with Marcus. Conscience doesn't pay dividends. Ethan gave a faint smile. It pays something more, useful clarity. He walked toward the edge of the court, stretching his shoulders, trying to shrug off the conversation. Behind him, Marcus called out, You know, if you're trying to make a statement, just donate another $1 million. That's what the rest of us do. Ethan didn't answer. The ball machine whirred to life again, feeding him serves one after another. He hit each with perfect form, the sound of contact sharp and rhythmic. From the patio, Marcus muttered, He's really doing it. Robert adjusted his sunglasses. He always was stubborn, but this time, he's not just poking the system, he's walking into it with a torch. Maybe he wants to burn it down. Robert smirked. Let's hope he remembers that ashes don't impress donors. The rhythmic thwack of the tennis ball filled the air until the sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the courts. Ethan finally stopped, chest rising, breath even. The sweat on his forearms caught the light like glass. He stood there, racket loose in hand, staring at the skyline. He could almost hear their laughter echoing behind him, the condescension, the amusement. It shouldn't have mattered. It did matter. He thought of Claire's steady voice, the way she'd said, I'd come as your colleague, not a pawn. Her quiet insistence on dignity. And then he thought of Marcus's words, of his mother's imagined disappointment, of the eyes that would follow them across that ballroom. He had spent years perfecting the art of self-control, learning which truths to reveal, which to hide. But this simple act of sincerity felt like rebellion. He packed his racket, thanked the attendant, and made his way to the parking lot. The evening air carried the scent of cut grass and money. He passed the valet stand, nodding politely, but his thoughts were far away. Inside the car, the dashboard clock glowed soft blue. He sat there for a long time without starting the engine. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about profit margins or energy grids. He was thinking about a woman who took the train before dawn, who brought calm into chaos, who made silence feel human. He was also thinking about how cruel the world could be to people who didn't fit its unspoken hierarchies. The country club lights dimmed behind him as he finally started the car. Tires crunched over gravel. The city waited below, glittering like a promise and a warning. For the first time, Ethan Monroe wondered if sincerity could survive a room built on pretense. The rain had returned to Colorado Springs, soft and persistent, drumming gently against the windows of Claire Bennett's small apartment. The clock on the microwave blinked 11:42 p.m., its blue light flickering over a half-eaten bowl of soup and a stack of unpaid medical bills. The day had been long. The conversation replayed in her head a dozen times, his voice steady, her own uncertain. I need someone real beside me. She'd smiled politely when she left his office, but hours later, the words still clung to her like perfume she couldn't wash off. Now, sitting at her kitchen table, she opened her laptop, scrolling through her usual late-night routine project updates, vendor emails, A new article on the Foundation's work. The screen's glow softened the shadows of the room, illuminating the faded wallpaper her mother refused to change. In the next room, Margaret Bennett was asleep, the hum of her oxygen machine filling the silence with steady rhythm. It was a sound Claire both hated and depended on. It meant her mother was still here, still breathing. She closed her laptop, folded her hands, and stared at the quiet apartment that held everything she cared about and everything that held her back. Ethan's invitation had stirred something she didn't want to name. It wasn't just nerves about appearances. It was the danger of hope. Hope that she could belong somewhere she'd only ever served. Hope that she might be seen, truly seen, beyond the title on her nameplate. She rubbed her temples. "This is absurd," she whispered. "It's just one evening." But she knew it wasn't. Not for her. For Ethan, it might be a gesture, a statement, a brief rebellion against his polished world. For her, it could be a moment that altered how people saw her, or destroyed the fragile respect she'd earned. Her phone buzzed. Noah, her younger brother, texting from his dorm. "You still awake?" She smiled faintly. "Barely. Thinking about that fancy gala thing you mentioned. A little, then stop thinking. You overthink everything. Go. Have fun. Be the coolest person in that room. It's not that simple. It never is. But nothing changes if you keep standing in the back row." She stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then she typed a single emoji, a small heart, and set the phone aside. In the quiet that followed, she heard her mother cough softly in the next room. Claire got up, patted across the carpet, and peeked in. Margaret's eyes fluttered open. "Still up. Honey couldn't sleep," Claire said, sitting at the edge of the bed. "Worrying," something like that. Her mother reached over, turning off the small reading lamp. "It's about him, isn't it?" Claire stiffened. "What, Ethan?" Her mother's voice was gentle, knowing. "You mentioned he asked you to go somewhere." Claire sighed. "The Foundation gala. He wants me to go with him. Says he needs someone real." Margaret smiled faintly in the dark. "That man's got sense. It's not that simple," Claire murmured. "It could look inappropriate." "According to whom?" "Everyone." Her mother chuckled weakly. "Everyone doesn't pay your rent or respect your work. You've spent years standing behind others, making them shine. Maybe it's time to step beside someone." The words landed softly but deep. Claire turned toward the window. The rain had slowed, leaving streaks on the glass that reflected the faint city lights beyond. "You really think I should go?" "I think," her mother said, voice fading with fatigue, "that if a man like Ethan Monroe sees you for who you are, you shouldn't hide just because others don't." Silence stretched. Only the oxygen machine filled it. "I just don't want to embarrass him or myself," Claire whispered. Margaret's eyes closed. "Dignity isn't about what you wear, sweetheart. It's how you carry yourself when the room underestimates you." Claire sat there for a while, watching her mother drift back to sleep. The rhythm of her breathing steadied, and Claire's own heartbeat began to match it. When she finally returned to the living room, she found herself standing by the bookshelf, running her fingers over the frame that held an old photograph, her father, smiling beneath an oak tree, his arm around a teenage Claire in a wrinkled school uniform. The image triggered a flood of memory rain that day too, the smell of wet earth, the hollow echo of the church bells at his funeral. She remembered gripping her mother's hand, her heart numb with grief, and she remembered whispering to herself, "I'll always live with dignity, no matter what." That promise had guided every decision since work hard, stay unseen, earn respect quietly. It had kept her safe. It had also kept her small. She set the frame down gently and crossed to the kitchen window. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The air shimmered with that fragile stillness that comes only after storms. She could almost see Denver's distant lights over the horizon, faint but steady. Somewhere out there, Ethan was probably still awake, maybe working, maybe regretting asking her. She imagined him sitting in that glass-walled penthouse, looking out at the same rain. She imagined how lonely that must feel. "He doesn't need pity," she thought. He needs honesty. And maybe, so do I. She went to the counter, picked up her phone, and opened her messages. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard for several long seconds. If you say yes, there's no going back. Her heart drummed like rain on glass. If you say no, you'll wonder forever. Finally, she began to type. If the offer still stands, I'll go. She hesitated, reread it, then added nothing else. No smiley face, no qualifier, just that simple, deliberate sentence. She hit send. The phone screen dimmed, leaving her reflection faintly visible. A woman still in her work blouse, hair unpinned, eyes tired but alive. In that reflection, she saw someone she hadn't seen in a long time, a woman capable of courage. She turned off the lights, leaving the apartment bathed in the silver glow of street lamps filtering through the curtains. As she lay down, exhaustion pulled her towards sleep, but a flicker of something new stirred beneath it, something between fear and anticipation. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in years, she wasn't running from possibility. And across the miles, in a penthouse above the clouds, Ethan Monroe's phone buzzed quietly on his nightstand. He reached for it, saw her message, and smiled to himself. Outside, the city breathed under the soft light of a clearing sky. 2 lives, one of glass, one of grit, had just begun to move toward the same horizon. Morning sunlight crept through the thin curtains, painting pale stripes across the floor of the Bennett apartment. Claire was already awake, sleeves rolled up, hair tied in a messy knot. The small kitchen smelled of coffee and starch spray, the scent of diligence. It was Saturday, 1 week before the gala. Her decision was made, but her nerves hadn't caught up. "Are you sure about this?" Noah asked from the couch, cereal bowl in hand. "No," Claire said, buttoning her coat. "But I'm doing it anyway." He grinned. "There's the sister I know terrified, but unstoppable." She laughed softly, tugging on her gloves. "Mom said she kept her old formal things in the attic." "Right?" "Yeah," Noah said. "Back corner, behind the Christmas boxes. Probably smells like the Reagan administration up there." She gave him a look that said, "Behave." He saluted with his spoon. A few minutes later, Claire stood at the foot of the narrow attic ladder. The wooden steps groaned under her weight as she climbed, each creak echoing like a memory. The air changed cooler, mustier, filled with the faint sweetness of cedar and old fabric. Dust danced in the morning light, slicing through the single round window. The attic was a museum of their lives, cardboard boxes labeled in fading Sharpie, a lamp missing its shade, a stack of vinyl records, her father's old tweed jacket still hanging on a hook like he might return for it someday. She crouched beside a large trunk, its brass corners tarnished but proud. On the lid, her mother's neat handwriting, Margaret's formal wear. The latch protested but gave way. Inside, tissue paper folded around decades of forgotten elegant satin, lace, sequins dulled by time. Claire sifted through each piece, fingers trembling, and then she saw it, a navy satin gown, its fabric catching light even through a veil of dust. Simple neckline, soft drape, sleeves slightly puffed in that unmistakable 1980s way. The tag read, "Caldwell and Sons, Fine Apparel," her mother's favorite brand from her hospital days. Claire lifted it gently, the material flowing like water over her arms. The color, deep, dignified blue, reminded her of twilight skies over Denver. From the corner of the attic, a voice called up. "Find anything?" "Maybe," she said. "Come see." Noah climbed halfway up the ladder, eyes wide. "Whoa, that's classy. Mom wore it to a hospital fundraiser before I was born. Looks like something out of a movie," he said, grinning. "Cinderella with a spread sheet." Claire laughed, startled by how warm that laughter felt. "Very funny. I'm serious. You could walk into that ballroom and make every CEO in the place nervous." She shook her head, but her smile lingered. "Let's just hope it still fits." Back downstairs. Her mother was waiting in the recliner, sunlight haloing her silver hair. When Claire held up the dress, Margaret's breath caught. "Oh my," she whispered. "I haven't seen that since the Children's Hospital fundraiser in '87. Your father said I look like midnight itself. It's beautiful." "Mom," Claire said softly. "It's more than beautiful," Margaret murmured. "It's ours. That gown bought with overtime shifts and stubborn pride. Every stitch meant something." Claire traced the seams with her fingers. "You think it'll work?" Her mother's eyes twinkled. "With a few adjustments and your posture, it'll be perfect." The rest of the afternoon unfolded in a kind of gentle motion picture, Noah setting up the sewing machine on the kitchen table, Margaret humming old tunes while pinning hems with careful hands, Claire standing still as fabric whispered around her ankles. Outside, snow began to fall, slow and steady, the kind that softened edges and made the world quiet. They worked in near silence, except for the machine's rhythmic hum. "Mom," Claire said after a while, "why did you stop going to those events?" Margaret paused mid-stitch. "After your father died, it didn't feel right. Those rooms were full of people pretending to care. He was one of the few who actually did." Claire nodded. She understood that kind of absence, the gap between intention and performance. "I think you're braver than me," her mother said suddenly. Claire blinked. "Braver? I'm terrified. That's what makes it bravery. Sweetheart." When the last thread was trimmed, the dress fit like memory, snug in the right places, forgiving in others. Margaret stepped back, eyes shining. "There," she said, "you're not trying to be anyone else. You're just reminding them who you are." Noah leaned against the doorframe. "Yeah, you'll knock 'em dead. Ethan's jaw's gonna hit the marble floor." Claire blushed. "It's not about him." "Sure," Noah said with a smirk. "And I go to architecture school for the cafeteria food." "Go do your homework," she said, swatting at him with a fabric brush. He ducked away, laughing. "Fine, fine. But seriously, you look amazing, sis." When he was gone, Claire turned to the mirror hanging by the window. The woman staring back wasn't a fantasy. She was real, imperfect, present. The gown shimmered just enough to catch light, not attention. Her mother handed her a small jewelry box. Inside lay a simple silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. "Your father gave me this when he proposed," Margaret said softly. "He said it reminded him that even in darkness, there's light. I want you to wear it. I can't." "Mom, it's too special. It's meant to be worn," she said, pressing it into Claire's palm. "And you, my dear, are exactly who he'd want to see wearing it now." Tears welled in Claire's eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, she stayed up folding the altered gown into a garment bag. She touched the pendant at her neck, feeling the cool metal against her skin. In her heart, the words formed quietly. This isn't about fitting in. It's about showing up. She placed the gown carefully in her closet beside her work clothes, a symbol of both worlds she straddled. Tomorrow, she'd go back to spreadsheets and schedules. But tonight, the hum of the sewing machine still lingered in her ears, the sound of family, resilience, and hope stitched together. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Each flake landed softly, like applause no one could hear. And in the stillness of that winter night, the navy satin caught a sliver of moonlight through the window, gleaming faintly as if remembering every heartbeat it had once witnessed, and every new one it was about to. Downtown Denver shimmered under a thin veil of snow, each flake catching the glow of street lamps like falling sparks. The Brown Palace Hotel rose out of the city like a monument to elegance arched windows, carved stone, and the faint hum of anticipation that comes only with expensive events and expensive expectations. Inside, chandeliers glittered like captured constellations. The lobby smelled of polished wood and white roses. A string quartet rehearsed faintly in the distance, their notes slipping through the marble corridors like whispered secrets. Outside, a long line of luxury vehicles pulled up one by one. Drivers opened doors, Women in gowns stepped out, diamonds flashing, laughter practiced. Photographers waited under the awning, their cameras flashing like distant lightning. And then came a black sedan, sleek, understated, almost shy in its arrival. Ethan Monroe stepped out first. His tuxedo fit like it had been cut for a magazine cover, but his expression wasn't the usual mask of composure. Beneath the calm exterior, his pulse ticked faster than it had in years. He adjusted his cufflinks silver, monogrammed, gifts from a world he'd begun to outgrow. For the first time in his adult life, he felt not powerful, but uncertain. He checked his watch, then the rear door opened. Claire Bennett stepped out. For a moment, the night seemed to pause. She didn't sparkle or shimmer like the other guests. Her gown, navy satin, graceful, familiar, caught the soft light and reflected it like twilight water. Her hair, swept into a low chignon, framed her face with delicate strands that moved when she breathed. Around her neck, the silver crescent pendant gleamed faintly, the moon wearing its own reflection. Ethan forgot to breathe. "Good evening," she said, her voice steady but low. "You look—" He stopped. Words felt too small. Incredible. Claire smiled modest, fleeting. "So do you, Mr. Monroe?" He offered his arm. "Shall we—" She hesitated for half a heartbeat before resting her hand lightly against his sleeve. The warmth of his skin through the fabric startled her. She told herself it was nerves, nothing more. But the air between them felt charged, like the space before a storm. Inside the hotel, light cascaded down from chandeliers, washing over marble columns and gold accents. The ballroom had been transformed into a winter garden, white lilies, silver candles, ice sculptures glinting like frozen wings. As they entered, conversation softened, heads turned. Whispers began, quiet but unmistakable. "Is that his assistant?" "No, it can't be." "Oh, it is. Look at that dress, how quaint." The camera flashes started again. Sharp, invasive bursts that made Claire's vision blink white for seconds at a time. Each flash felt like thunder, echoing in her chest. She kept her chin high, her movements measured. Years of professionalism trained her posture, but nothing had prepared her for the weight of 100 unseen judgments. Every glance felt like a verdict. She could feel the air tighten as they passed groups of polished donors and socialites. Ethan's stride remained calm, purposeful, but she noticed his fingers flex slightly against his cuff, his tell when he was fighting irritation. At the base of the grand staircase, a photographer called out, "Mr. Monroe, over here." Sir Ethan turned, smiled politely, but didn't stop. He guided Claire gently toward the registration table. "Just breathe," he murmured without looking at her. "I am," she whispered back. "Barely." He glanced sideways, his mouth curving into something tender. "You belong here, Claire." She wanted to believe him, but belonging wasn't a gift someone could hand her. It had to be claimed quietly, steadily, like her father had taught her. She exhaled and met the gaze of a woman nearby, a guest dripping in emeralds, her expression polite but assessing. Claire nodded and smiled, and the woman blinked, uncertain how to respond. It was a small victory, invisible but real. The evening unfolded in layers of sound and shimmer. The orchestra played something elegant and unhurried. Waiters glided like ghosts with trays of champagne. Laughter floated like perfume. Ethan greeted board members, senators, CEOs. He moved through the crowd with ease, his words measured, his presence commanding. But every few moments, his eyes found Claire. She was speaking with a foundation volunteer, a young nurse who ran one of the pediatric programs Monroe Innovations funded. Claire asked questions, listened, nodded. Her interest was genuine, her tone warm. Within minutes, the nurse was laughing softly. The earlier stiffness gone, Ethan felt a quiet pride rise in his chest. She wasn't pretending to belong. She was reminding the room what belonging actually looked like. From across the ballroom, he saw Marcus Hale and Robert Klein near the champagne bar. Both watched him, their expressions sharp with amusement. Marcus lifted his glass slightly in mock salute. Robert whispered something that made Marcus laugh. Ethan ignored them, or tried to. He turned back to Claire just as she caught his eye. The small smile she gave him steady. Knowing was answer enough. Later, as dinner began, they found their seats at a round table near the front, surrounded by names that could buy headlines. A senator's wife complimented Claire's pendant. A tech investor asked about her work, assuming she was in public relations. "I manage Mr. Monroe's executive operations," Claire said, polite but firm. "Mostly our philanthropic programs." The investor blinked, then smiled awkwardly. "Ah, impressive." Ethan hid his amusement behind his wine glass. As the courses arrived, salad, bisque, roasted lamb. Claire's initial tension eased. The conversation shifted toward the Foundation's projects. She spoke about the children's therapy units, the virtual learning pods Monroe Innovations had donated. Her voice carried quiet authority. And soon, people were listening not because of her dress, but because of her mind. Ethan felt the room tilt slightly, perceptions rearranging. When the program host approached the stage, the lights dimmed. A short film began to play images of children in hospital beds smiling at tablets, learning through interactive programs, laughing. Claire's throat tightened. Ethan's hand rested on the table beside hers. Close, but not touching, the screen faded to black, replaced by applause. He leaned closer, voice just above a whisper. "This is what you helped build." She looked at him, surprised. I mean we... None of this happens without you." Her heart stuttered, caught between gratitude and disbelief. As the orchestra began its first dance, the lights softened again. Couples moved gracefully to the floor. Ethan turned to her, eyes questioning. "Would you?" he asked, offering his hand. Claire hesitated, then nodded. The music swelled. They moved together, slow and deliberate. The rhythm wasn't perfect. He stepped forward when she expected him to turn. They laughed quietly, adjusting. Somewhere between the missteps and laughter, the ballroom around them blurred into a haze of gold and motion. Still nervous, he murmured, "Less now," she said, "though I think half the room is watching." "Let them." The way he said it, soft, unflinching, wrapped around her like a shield. She looked up at him, meeting his gaze fully for the first time that night. The chandeliers reflected in his eyes, small galaxies of light. For a moment, time softened, and in that stillness, her fear began to dissolve, not because the room accepted her, but because she did. When the song ended, applause rippled politely. Ethan led her off the floor, their steps perfectly in sync now. She glanced back once at the glittering crowd. It didn't feel overwhelming anymore. It felt distant, like something she'd already walked through and survived. By the door, a photographer raised his camera again. The flash burst like lightning, capturing them mid-step, the contrast of midnight satin and black tuxedo against the golden glow of chandeliers. Ethan leaned closer, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "You belong here, Claire." This time, she didn't argue. She just smiled softly, knowingly. The ballroom at the Brown Palace hummed with the orchestral rhythm of Status' soft laughter, crystal against crystal, the rustle of silk and tailored wool. Dinner was in full swing now, the murmur of conversation weaving between candlelight and champagne bubbles. At table 9, where the most influential names of the evening had been placed, Ethan Monroe sat tall but composed. To his right sat Claire Bennett, her posture graceful, her hands folded gently over her lap. To anyone glancing their way, she appeared entirely at ease. Only Ethan, who had watched her navigate boardrooms, late-night calls, and crises, could see the faint tremor at the corner of her thumb, the micro-expression that betrayed the pressure of being seen. Across from them sat Robert Klein, his silver hair catching the chandelier light like polished glass. Beside him, Marcus Hale smirked over his wine. On Robert's left, Senator Elise Harper, chairwoman of the Children's Health Committee, listened to a discussion about tax incentives with a diplomat's practiced smile. So, Ethan, Marcus began, swirling his drink lazily, you've managed to make quite the impression tonight. Your table's certainly upgraded. The comment drew a ripple of amusement from nearby guests. Ethan's expression remained neutral. I tend to bring the people who make the work possible. Admirable, Robert said, his tone velvet smooth but edged. So tell me, Claire? He turned his gaze on her, the smile too sharp to be kind. What's your favorite brand of champagne? Surely you have a preference? The words dripped with condescension disguised as curiosity. For a heartbeat, Claire froze. Around the table, conversation dipped. Forks hesitated. She could feel the heat creeping up her neck. Her first instinct to laugh politely, to deflect, flashed through her mind. But then she remembered her mother's voice. Dignity isn't about what you wear. It's how you carry yourself when the room underestimates you. She took a breath. Well, she said, her tone soft but steady, I can't say I've developed a taste for luxury labels, but I do have a preference for investments that last longer than bubbles. Robert's eyebrows lifted slightly, such as he asked, the word wrapped in silk but lined with challenge. Claire met his eyes directly. Education funding, she said, especially for children who spend months in hospitals. The programs Mr. Monroe's company supports give them access to interactive learning while they recover. It helps them stay connected to their classmates, their teachers to normalcy. That's the kind of return I believe in. For a moment, silence fell around the table. Then softly, deliberately, Dr. Elise Harper set down her wine glass and began to clap. Well said, she murmured. We could use more voices like yours in our discussions. Ms. Bennett. Applause followed, polite but genuine. Robert's smirk faltered, replaced by a thin, unreadable line. Marcus hid his discomfort behind a cough. Ethan's gaze lingered on Claire, not as a CEO appraising an employee, but as a man seeing something luminous break through the fog of routine. The orchestra resumed its music. Conversation rose again, lighter now, but the balance at table 9 had shifted. Claire had passed an unspoken test, the kind she never signed up for but had always sensed coming. She smiled at the senator. Thank you, Dr. Harper. It's the children who do the hard work. Really? We just build the tools. Harper's eyes softened. Humility and insight. A rare combination. Across the table, Robert cleared his throat. Indeed, he said, recovering his poise. Perhaps you should speak at next year's gala. Ms. Bennett, I'd be honored, Claire replied simply. The subtle grace in her tone was sharper than any rebuttal. Dinner continued, salmon glazed with citrus, tender lamb on porcelain plates, laughter threading between courses. Ethan found himself speaking less and observing more. He'd been to hundreds of these events. They'd all blurred together the same people, the same small talk, the same strategic alliances disguised as friendship, but tonight felt different. Alive. Claire's presence shifted the temperature of every conversation she touched. When she spoke with the senator about community outreach, people leaned in. When she listened to a biotech researcher explain pediatric prosthetics, her questions carried depth. Ethan watched from beside her, a quiet pride building in his chest. The ballroom lights shimmered over her navy gown. Every movement she made was measured, calm a dance between composure and authenticity. And while others saw a curiosity, the assistant among moguls, Ethan saw something entirely different. He saw truth walking unafraid through a room full of facades. At one point, a young journalist approached the table, camera slung around her shoulder. Mr. Monroe, she said, could we get a photo for the feature? You and your guest Ethan glanced at Claire. She nodded. They stood side by side near the stage as flashes burst again, quick, blinding. The journalist smiled. Lovely. Ms. Bennett, could I ask your title for the caption? Claire hesitated for a heartbeat. Executive assistant, she said finally. The journalist looked surprised, then intrigued. You must have an interesting view of the company. I do, Claire said, eyes glinting. From where I stand, it looks like a place that remembers people matter more than profit. The journalist's smile widened. That's a quote worth printing. Ethan's lips curved in quiet amusement. Just make sure she gets the byline. The journalist laughed and moved on. For a moment, they stood together in the soft light, surrounded by the low hum of music and laughter. You handled that beautifully, Ethan said. It's what you pay me for, she replied. He tilted his head. I think tonight, you're underpaid. Her laughter, low and genuine, pulled him in like gravity. As dessert was served, Harper leaned toward Ethan. You've got an exceptional team, Mr. Monroe, particularly that one. I know, he said, she makes the difficult look easy. Harper smiled knowingly. Don't let this one get buried in corporate layers. The good ones slip away if they're not seen. Ethan looked toward Claire, who was now talking with a volunteer coordinator about mental health initiatives. I see her, he said softly. Harper nodded. Good. Then make sure the world does too. Later, as the plates cleared and the orchestra played a slow waltz, Ethan found himself studying the ballroom with new eyes. The chandeliers seemed warmer now, the laughter less hollow. The entire night, every shining, shallow detail suddenly felt human again. Because of her. He thought of what Robert had said earlier. Optics, image, hierarchy. And he realized how small those things seemed compared to authenticity, compared to the quiet strength sitting beside him. Claire turned toward him then, sensing his gaze. Are you all right? He smiled. Better than I've been in years. Her expression softened. You don't have to protect me. You know, I can handle this. I know, he said. That's what makes me proud. The words hung there, honest and heavy, as the music swelled around them. For a few moments, the world slowed, forks stilled, laughter blurred. The violins carried the rhythm of something larger. In the glow of that ballroom, with 1,000 eyes around them, Ethan Monroe felt something he hadn't felt since before success had hardened him. For the first time, his world felt alive. The orchestra shifted from a lively waltz to something slower, softer, the kind of melody that made time hesitate. The opening notes of Moon River unfurled through the ballroom like a sigh. Delicate and wistful, conversations dimmed, couples drifted toward the dance floor, drawn by nostalgia more than rhythm. Ethan Monroe stood at the edge of the floor, watching as the light from the chandeliers glimmered over crystal and satin. The night had already given him more than he expected. Respect earned. Assumptions shattered. But there was one more moment waiting, unspoken and inevitable. He turned toward Claire Bennett, who sat beside him, tracing the rim of her glass absent-mindedly. She looked calm, almost serene, but he could sense the heartbeat of unease beneath that composure. He extended a hand. Would you dance with me? Her eyes lifted a flicker of surprise, then hesitation. Ethan, I just won, he said softly. No cameras, no audience, just us. After a brief silence, she placed her hand in his. Her fingers were cool, her pulse faintly quick. He led her onto the floor. As they found their place among the swaying crowd, something inside both of them went still, as if the world, for once, had stopped demanding performance. The music wrapped around them, Moon River, wider than a mile. Ethan's hand rested gently at her waist, her other hand in his. Their first few steps were tentative, a quiet negotiation of distance and trust. Claire focused on the rhythm, on the floor beneath her heels, on not stepping where she shouldn't. But slowly, the anxiety melted into awareness of the warmth of his touch, the steady calm of his breathing, the unspoken conversation in every movement. You're good at this, she said softly. He smiled. I've had practice. I haven't danced in years. I'd never have guessed. I'm improvising, she murmured. So am I. They both laughed, the sound low and almost private, swallowed by the swell of violins. Around them, the ballroom blurred, faces softened into light and color, chandeliers fractured into stars. In that glow, they weren't CEO and assistant, or man and woman divided by class. They were two people suspended in the same breath, each finding in the other a mirror they hadn't known they needed. Ethan's thoughts tangled. This is wrong, he told himself. You can't cross that line. She deserves better than confusion. But then, what if this isn't confusion? What if this is clarity? Finally, Claire's mind was no quieter. He's my boss. This can't mean anything. But when she met his gaze, that thought dissolved like sugar in tea. There was no pretense in his eyes, no power, no hierarchy, just truth. She looked away first, heart thudding. You realize they're all watching? Let them, he said simply. The words sent a quiet tremor through her. She had spent her entire life avoiding the spotlight, careful, composed, small enough to survive. Now, under the chandeliers, she felt seen, not exposed, seen. The song rose toward its bridge, and the space between them grew smaller. His hand moved slightly, not possessive, just anchoring a silent, I'm here. Claire closed her eyes for a moment. The lyrics floated around them, two drifters, off to see the world. When she opened them again, Ethan was looking at her, really looking, as though every polished surface in his life had finally reflected something worth keeping. You keep surprising me, he said quietly. That's not hard, she teased. You never expect much from anyone. On the contrary, he said, a faint smile touching his lips. I expect too much. You're the first person who's lived up to it. The air shifted gentle but undeniable. Claire felt it, too. The realization that something between them had changed, or maybe had been changing all along, waiting for this song, this night, to reveal itself. The dance slowed further, as if the orchestra had chosen mercy. Ethan leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. Do you regret saying yes? She shook her head. Not yet. He smiled. That's good enough for me. They turned in slow circles, the music spinning around them like silk. Claire felt the weight of the gazes, the donors, the skeptics, the ones who whispered behind raised hands. For years, those looks would have crushed her. Tonight, they barely reached. Every glance that once felt like a verdict now felt like a test she no longer needed to pass. She looked up at him, her expression calm but sure. If anyone asks who I am, he tilted his head slightly. Yes, tell them I'm someone who finally stopped hiding. Ethan's throat tightened. There were moments words couldn't hold, moments that demanded silence because sound would ruin them. This was one. The song neared its end. The strings softened into a sigh, the final notes like light dimming on water. He didn't want it to end. Not this dance, not this fragile truth hanging between them. But endings, like dawn, came whether one was ready or not. As the last chord faded, applause rippled softly through the ballroom. They stepped apart, hands reluctant to separate. The applause wasn't for them, but for a few seconds, it felt like it was. Claire looked down, breath trembling just enough to reveal what her face concealed. Thank you for asking, she said. Thank you for saying yes. They moved off the floor together, around them. The night resumed its rhythm, waiters collecting glasses, laughter rising, the next song beginning. But something essential had shifted. Ethan felt lighter, as if a weight he hadn't known he carried had been set down quietly at her feet. Claire felt steadier, as if the ground beneath her had finally stopped moving. Neither of them said another word. They didn't need to. From across the room, Dr. Elise Harper watched with a knowing smile. That, she whispered to her husband, wasn't just a dance. Later, outside the ballroom, Ethan and Claire stood near the grand staircase. The air was cooler there, quieter. She ran her finger along the silver railing, still catching her breath. That was unexpected. He looked at her, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. Maybe. But sometimes the unexpected is what feels most right. She didn't answer. Her eyes drifted to the ballroom doors, the laughter, the glittering crowd, the flashes of a world that had once seemed untouchable. Tomorrow, she said quietly, everything goes back to normal. Maybe, he said, but not tonight. She turned to face him, searching his eyes for something she couldn't name. Ethan, what happens now? He hesitated, then said, we take one step at a time, like in the dance. Her lips curved faintly. Then don't step on my toes. He smiled that rare, unguarded smile that reached his eyes. Wouldn't dream of it. They both laughed softly, and for a moment, the heaviness of the world receded. Behind them, through the glass doors, the orchestra began another song, but neither moved to go back. They stood together under the chandelier's fading glow, not boss and assistant, not man and woman caught between worlds, but two souls who had stopped hiding long enough to see each other clearly. Monday morning broke clear and cold over Denver, the kind of brightness that felt almost mocking after a night of magic. The city skyline gleamed, untouched by the gossip that was already unraveling through its glass towers. Inside Monroe Innovations, the usual quiet hum of keyboards and coffee machines was replaced by something else, the low, electric buzz of whispering. Screens flickered across the open plan office. A headline glared from every corner. Tech tycoon and his assistant steal the spotlight at Foundation Gala. Underneath it, a photo Ethan Monroe in his black tuxedo, Claire Bennett at his side, the chandeliers behind them like halos. She was laughing, head tilted slightly toward him. It looked intimate, too intimate. The article's tone was polite but sharp. Monroe, known for his reclusive demeanor, surprised guests at the Children's Health Foundation Gala by bringing his assistant as his companion. Sources say the pairing raised eyebrows among Denver's elite. Claire's stomach turned. She closed her laptop slowly, but the whispers were already circling. Did you see the picture? She's his assistant, right? Well, she won't be for long, one way or another. Their voices carried across the office like static. At her desk, Claire forced herself to breathe evenly. Her hands trembled slightly as she organized Ethan's meeting files. She had done this 1,000 times before, but today the pages wouldn't stay still. She tried to focus on the familiar, the rhythm of her typing, the smell of her coffee, the hum of the heating vent. But under it all, a quiet dread built like pressure behind her ribs. Upstairs, on the top floor, Ethan Monroe stood before the wide glass windows of his office, the same windows that once symbolized success and now felt like exposure. His phone rang, the tone clipped and cold. He didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. He answered quietly, "Mother?" Lydia Monroe's voice came sharp and elegant, like glass breaking in slow motion. "Ethan, tell me I'm not reading this." "Good morning to you too," he said, voice level. "Don't you dare deflect me with that tone," she snapped. "You've turned our family's name into dinner table gossip. Every business column in the country is running those photos. Do you have any idea what this looks like?" He closed his eyes. "Yes, I do. It looks like I brought a trusted colleague to a charity gala. Nothing more." "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Trusted colleague. The media doesn't see that. They see a man in power with his assistant on his arm. Your assistant. Do you realize how that reads? How it reflects on your judgment, on our legacy?" Her words struck deeper than he wanted to admit. "Mother," he said finally, his voice quieter but firmer, "you raised me to value integrity over perception. That's what I did. Claire represents this company with more honesty than most of the board combined." "Integrity," Lydia repeated, disbelief dripping from the word. "Ethan, you're not listening. You're naive if you think the world cares about integrity. They care about optics. And this," she said, her voice trembling with restrained fury, "is a disaster of optics." He took a breath, his jaw tightening. "I'm not ashamed of how I conduct myself, and I won't let you shame me for respecting someone who's earned it." There was silence on the line, then, softly, "You sound just like your father." He flinched. It wasn't a compliment. The line went dead. He stood there for a long time, phone still in his hand, watching sunlight scatter across the skyline. When he finally sat down, guilt crept in, quiet but heavy. Not guilt for his mother's words, but for what Claire might be facing below, in the office filled with whispers he could already imagine. By noon, Claire felt every eye on her. Passing colleagues stopped mid-conversation when she entered the break room. Even the interns, usually too nervous to notice anything, watched her with cautious curiosity. When she approached the elevator, two executives from accounting stepped aside, their smiles too quick. One whispered after she passed, "Just loud enough, guess loyalty has its perks." The words stung sharper than she expected. In her cubicle, her email inbox overflowed meeting requests, press inquiries, and one terse message from HR asking for a clarity discussion regarding public representation. She stared at the screen until the words blurred. All the composure she had built so carefully began to crack. Her throat tightened, breath unsteady. For the first time since that night, the photographs, the laughter, the chandelier light turned from memory to accusation. She had thought she was representing the company. Now, it seemed the company thought she was representing scandal. Her phone buzzed a text from Ethan. "Ignore the noise. Meet me at 4. We'll handle this together." She stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering over the screen, then locked the phone and set it face down. Together? It was a kind word, but in that moment, it felt far away. By 3, the day had hollowed her out. Every polite glance felt like pity, every whisper like mockery. She tried to bury herself in spreadsheets, emails, logistics, the small anchors that had always steadied her. But even numbers betrayed her focus. She thought about her mother's gown hanging in the closet, about the dance under chandeliers that had felt like freedom, about the look in Ethan's eyes, sincere, unguarded. And then she thought about the headlines, the laughter, the sidelong stares. Maybe she'd misread everything. Maybe she had crossed a line without knowing it. Maybe the woman in that navy gown was never meant to belong in that world. The thought came like a knife, sharp, final, familiar. At 3:45 she stood up, slipped her coat from the chair, and gathered her bag. She walked through the office, head high, every step deliberate. Someone whispered her name, another laughed quietly. She didn't look back. When the elevator doors closed, the hum of gossip vanished. The silence was a relief. She leaned against the mirrored wall, eyes closed. For the first time, tears came. Not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet surrender of someone who had spent too long holding herself together. As the elevator descended, she whispered to no one. Maybe this was a mistake, but deep down, beneath the ache, another voice stirred smaller, gentler, one that sounded like her mother. Dignity isn't about where you stand. It's how you rise after they push you down. The elevator chimed, the doors opened. She stepped out into the cold November air, her reflection fading in the glass behind her. For now, she told herself, she just needed to breathe. The following Friday brought a kind of calm that didn't feel like peace, more like the quiet that follows a storm no one's sure has truly passed. The office had returned to its routine rhythms, phones ringing, coffee brewing, keyboards clattering. But for Claire Bennett, the sound was hollow. She had stayed late every night since the gala, quietly cleaning up after the chaos of unwanted headlines. She kept her head down, her voice measured, her smiles polite. The whispers had faded into the background noise of corporate life, but not completely. The air still felt thinner than before, as if every breath had to be earned. So, when she received an email from Dr. Elise Harper inviting her to lunch downtown, Claire assumed it was to discuss public relations or foundation follow-up. The subject line, an opportunity to talk, didn't give much away. By noon, she was seated across from the senator at a quiet bistro overlooking Larimer Square. The restaurant was warm and bright, the hum of conversation softened by the clinking of silverware and the faint scent of rosemary bread. Dr. Harper arrived precisely on time, elegant in a tailored navy suit. She greeted Claire warmly, No trace of condescension or the polite curiosity that so many others had shown since the gala. "Ms. Bennett," she said, sitting down. "It's good to see you again." "Thank you, Senator." "And please, Claire is fine." "Then you must call me Elise," the older woman replied with a smile. "We're not in the ballroom anymore." They ordered light salads and tea. For a few minutes, they spoke of the foundation's event, the record donations, the media coverage, the new partnerships forming. Claire managed a small, genuine smile. "It was a remarkable night," Elise said, watching her carefully. "And not just for the foundation." Claire glanced down at her cup, suddenly aware of the pendant around her neck, the crescent moon her father had given her mother. Now hers. She turned it slowly between her fingers. "It was unexpected," she admitted. Elise leaned in slightly. "The way you spoke that evening about education, about giving children hope, it left an impression on more than a few of us." Claire looked up, unsure how to respond. "I was just trying to represent the company." "And you did," Elise said gently. "But you also represented something larger. Compassion, clarity, the kind of leadership that can't be taught." A pause. Then the senator continued, her voice steady but kind. "That's actually why I wanted to meet today." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a slim folder, sliding it across the table. The embossed logo read, "Children's Health Foundation Corporate Partnerships Division." Claire blinked. "What's this?" "It's a proposal," Elise said. "We're creating a new position, Director of Corporate Partnerships. Someone who can bridge the gap between philanthropy and innovation. You'd lead initiatives, negotiate sponsorships, design programs for children's education and rehabilitation. It's work you already do, but without the limits of corporate politics." Claire hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of the folder. "You mean, you want me to run it?" "Yes," Elise said simply. "You'd report directly to me and the board. The position is full-time, based here in Denver, with the flexibility to travel. The salary is competitive, though. I suspect it's not the number that will sway you." Claire laughed softly. "No, it never is." Elise studied her carefully. "I know this puts you in a difficult position. You're loyal to Ethan, to Monroe Innovations. But I also know how much you care about the mission behind what you do. You spoke that night with the conviction of someone who's meant to lead, not just assist." Claire's throat tightened. "I've never thought of myself as a leader." "Then maybe it's time you did," Elise said. The words hung between them like the soft echo of a bell. Lunch stretched into an hour, then 2. Elise spoke of the foundation's goals, expanding programs to rural hospitals, integrating technology into therapy for chronically ill children, launching scholarship funds. Claire listened, her heart tugged in 2 directions. This was everything she believed in, everything she had worked toward: purpose, impact, human connection. But behind every thought was Ethan. She pictured him in his office, the skyline behind him, sleeves rolled up, mind already 3 steps ahead of the world. She thought of his rare laugh, the way he looked at her during their dance, unguarded, uncertain, but real. He had given her trust. He had defended her. And yet, part of her wondered if staying meant forever standing in his shadow. "You seem far away," Elise said softly. Claire blinked. "I'm sorry. It's a lot to take in." "I understand," the senator said. "You don't have to decide today. But I'll need to know within the month. The board wants to announce the division at our spring conference." Claire nodded, her mind still spinning. I need time." "Of course." Elise's tone softened. "But take this from someone who's seen both sides of power. Claire, don't confuse loyalty with limitation. The people we respect most are often the ones we eventually have to leave behind." Claire looked down at the pendant again. The silver crescent caught the sunlight streaming through the window, scattering light across her wrist. Her father's words came back to her, even in darkness. "There's light." She closed the folder gently and smiled. "Thank you for believing in me." "I'm not the only one who does," Elise said, "but I might be the first to say it out loud." That evening, Ethan sat in his penthouse office long after the staff had gone home. The city lights blinked below like scattered fireflies. His tie was loosened, his jacket draped across a chair. He'd spent the week trying to contain the fallout from the gala, the investors' questions, the board's unease, his mother's disapproval, but none of that weighed on him as much as the silence from Claire. He hadn't seen her all day except in passing, her expression polite but distant. He tried to work, but his focus scattered, every few minutes. His eyes drifted toward the empty chair across from his desk, her chair. He could still hear her laughter from that night. See the confidence in her eyes when she faced down Robert Klein. Feel the weight of her hand against his during the dance. Now. All of it felt like something fragile he might have broken without meaning to. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. You've built empires out of logic. Ethan, he thought, but you can't reason your way through this. He wanted to talk to her to tell her he didn't regret a thing. But part of him feared that speaking would push her further away. The phone buzzed with a message from Marcus Press still chewing on the gala. Might want to lay low. Also heard a rumor she's meeting with Harper. Watch your headlines. Ethan froze. For a long time, he didn't move, just stared out at the city until the skyline blurred. Somewhere deep down, he already knew the truth. He wasn't afraid of scandal. He was afraid of losing her. The sun was setting over Denver, pouring amber light through the glass walls of Ethan Monroe's office. The skyline outside looked almost unreal. Buildings turned to silhouettes, the horizon glowing with gold and rose. Inside, the only sound was the faint hum of the air system and the muted rhythm of Ethan's pen tapping against the desk. He wasn't working. The open laptop before him was just a prop. Spreadsheets forgotten. Emails unanswered. His thoughts circled the same orbit they had, for days, Claire Bennett, the silence between them, and the growing fear that silence was starting to mean goodbye. When the elevator bell chimed down the hall, he looked up. A moment later, Claire appeared at the door, her reflection overlapping his in the glass. "Do you have a minute?" she asked quietly. He set the pen down, his heartbeat already quickening. "Always." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Her face was calm, professional, but her hands were clasped too tightly in front of her. He recognized the sign, the small armor she wore when she was bracing herself. "I won't take long," she said, walking toward the window. "I just thought you should hear it from me before it spreads any further." He stood, uncertain whether to move closer or stay where he was. "Hear what I met with Dr. Harper," she said. "She offered me a position, Director of Corporate Partnerships at the Children's Health Foundation." The words landed softly but carried the weight of a door closing. Ethan exhaled slowly. He had expected this, or something like it. Still, hearing it aloud felt like watching a fault line split open right beneath him. "That's incredible." He managed, "You deserve it." Her eyes flicked toward him, searching for sarcasm, but there was none, only quiet sincerity. "It would mean leaving Monroe Innovations," she said. "I assumed as much." Silence stretched between them. Outside, the sun slid lower, painting the office in long amber shadows. "I haven't decided," she said after a moment. "It's everything I've ever wanted: purpose, independence. But—" She trailed off, the word hanging like a half-broken branch. But he prompted gently. She turned to face him. "I don't want to walk away from something that matters just because the world decided to misunderstand it." He took a slow step closer. "You mean us?" Her breath hitched, but she didn't look away. "Do I, Claire?" His voice softened. "You don't have to protect me from what we both know is true." For a moment, the city faded, and all that existed was the faint hum of their breathing. "I can't pretend nothing happened that night," she said, "but I also can't afford to lose everything I've built because of it." "I would never ask you to," he said. "If you want that job, take it. You've earned it. But if you're staying because you think it's what I want—" She cut him off, her tone sharper than she meant. "This isn't about what you want." The words stung, but they were honest. Her voice trembled slightly as she continued. For years, I've worked to keep my head down, to be the person people depend on, reliable, invisible, safe. And for one night, I stepped out of that. I felt seen, alive. She looked down, hands trembling now, and then it all came crashing down. The rumors, the headlines, the whispers in the halls. I thought I could ignore it, but I can't. I don't want to be another story whispered about. Ethan took another step forward until he stood just a few feet away. Then, let's write our own. The words hung in the air raw, unguarded, impossible to take back. Claire blinked, the tears she had been holding back finally catching the light. You make it sound so easy. It isn't, he said, but neither is pretending we don't care. He hesitated, his voice low. You think I don't hear them too. The board, the investors, my own mother, everyone who thinks what we have is inappropriate, impossible, but I'm done living by their rules. Ethan, he took her hand, gently, as if afraid she might disappear. You've given me 3 years of your strength, your patience, your honesty. You've changed the way I see this company, the way I see myself. You don't owe me anything, but I needed you to know that before you make your choice. She didn't pull away. Her fingers tightened slightly in his. The sunset reflected in the glass behind them, wrapping them both in warm light that made the moment feel almost unreal. Do you regret it? She asked quietly. The gala. She nodded. He shook his head, not for a second. Claire exhaled, a sound caught somewhere between relief and exhaustion. You have no idea how complicated this is. He smiled faintly. I have some idea. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid. Gratitude, fear, longing. The city outside began to glitter, one light at a time, like 1,000 quiet witnesses. Finally, she whispered, I don't know what happens next. He looked at her, his expression steady. Then we start where we are. A pause. Her heartbeat filled the silence. Ethan, she said softly, if I stay, it has to be on my terms. No secrets, no apologies. I need to be respected not as your assistant, not as a roomer, but as your equal. He nodded slowly. Then that's exactly how it will be. Her lips trembled with a half smile, uncertain but real. The last streak of sunlight slipped behind the mountains, turning the office gold to gray. Somewhere far below, the streetlights flickered to life. Ethan lifted a hand, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered for just a moment longer than they should have. And then, as if the world itself had taken a breath, they leaned in a kiss soft enough to feel like a promise, brief enough to still be believable. Outside, the city continued to move, indifferent to the small miracle taking place behind the glass. When they finally pulled apart, Claire whispered, That's a dangerous way to start. Maybe, he said, smiling faintly, but it's honest. She took a step back, her composure returning, her hand still brushing her pendant. I'll stay, she said quietly. For now, on my terms. He nodded once. That's all I'd ever ask. They stood there a moment longer, the last light fading behind them, until the office was lit only by the soft glow of the city and the faint hum of the night. 6 months had passed since that conversation at dusk, 6 months since the moment when honesty replaced hesitation, when silence turned into something brave. The rhythm of Monroe Innovations had changed, subtly but unmistakably. Meetings ran smoother. The philanthropic projects that once felt like corporate gestures now pulsed with genuine purpose. There was laughter in the halls again, collaboration that felt human rather than hierarchical. And at the center of it all was Claire Bennett. Her nameplate on the office door no longer read executive assistant. It read Director of Social Impact. It had been Ethan's proposal formalized, voted on, and approved by the board with surprising enthusiasm. Even those who once doubted her now deferred to her insight. She'd earned their respect not through charm or politics, but through the quiet consistency of someone who led by example, under her direction. Monroe Innovations had expanded its partnerships with children's hospitals across the state. The Hope Tech Initiative, a project she'd drafted late one night over lukewarm coffee, had become a model for how corporations could balance profit and compassion. Every week, she sent progress reports to the board precise, eloquent, forward-thinking. And every time Ethan read them, pride welled in him like a sunrise he couldn't quite look at directly. Their relationship, if that was the word for it, had settled into something steady and private. They were careful, respectful, no office gossip, no late-night hand-holding in the elevator. Their boundaries were clear, but the connection was constant. A glance across the conference table, a quiet dinner after long days, shared silences that felt like home. To the outside world, they were professional. To each other, they were something truer. On a Friday evening in early spring, the Denver skyline burned gold again, the same color as that long-ago sunset, the same light that once held so many unspoken words. Ethan's apartment was warm and dimly lit. Jazz played softly through the speakers, the melody tender and unhurried. The dining table, usually bare and functional, had been transformed white linen. 2 plates of grilled salmon, candles flickering between them. Claire laughed as she entered, setting down her bag. "I thought we agreed no grand gestures on work nights." "This isn't grand," Ethan said, straightening his cufflinks. "It's dinner with candles and jazz," she teased, slipping off her coat. "You don't do casual well?" "Guilty," he admitted, smiling. "But I wanted to celebrate." She raised an eyebrow. "Celebrate what?" "The quarterly earnings or your new obsession with Miles Davis?" "Neither," he said. "You..." She froze for half a second, then softened. "Ethan," he gestured to the chair, "sit, eat first, compliments after." The first part of the meal passed in easy conversation. Stories about the Foundation's latest project, about her brother Noah's college graduation, about Lydia Monroe's recent, reluctant donation to the pediatric wing. "She says it's for optics," Ethan had murmured, "but I know better." After dessert, a small lemon tart she'd brought from her favorite bakery. She leaned back, content. "You're quiet," she said. "That usually means you're thinking too much." "Maybe," he said, smiling faintly. "Or maybe I'm just trying to remember this moment." Her smile faded into something gentler. "You sound sentimental." He stood then, walking toward the window, hands in his pockets. The city lights glittered below, mirrored in the glass. "I used to think success meant standing at the top of that skyline," he said quietly, "owning the view. But the higher I climbed, the lonelier it got. And then you walked into my life with your messy spreadsheets and your calm voice, and somehow..." He turned to her, his gaze steady. The silence didn't feel so empty anymore. She swallowed hard. "Ethan..." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. For a moment, she couldn't move. "I know this isn't exactly spontaneous," he said, his voice low but unwavering. "I've spent months making sure it's not about the company, not about pressure, not about appearances. It's about us, about everything we've built, and everything I want to build with you." He opened the box. Inside, nestled against white satin, was a simple diamond ring, elegant, understated, like her. "You once said you were afraid of being a distraction," he said, his voice trembling just enough to betray his nerves. "But the truth is, Claire, you've become my direction." Her breath caught. The room went still. Even the jazz seemed to hush. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. "Ethan, She laughed softly through the emotion. "You rehearsed that, didn't you?" "Only about 1,000 times," he admitted, smiling nervously. "And I still nearly forgot the words." She stood, the chair scraping softly against the floor. "Say yes, or I'll start quoting poetry," he said, trying to ease the tension. She laughed, a sound fragile and bright, and took a slow step forward. When she reached him, she took the box gently from his hand and closed it. "You don't have to convince me," she whispered. "You already did that when you started listening." His eyes softened. "Then, is that a yes?" She nodded, tears spilling freely now. "It's a yes." Ethan exhaled, relief and joy flooding through him at once. He slid the ring onto her finger, steady hands. Soft touch. The diamond caught the candlelight, scattering it across the window like stars. They stood there for a long moment, forehead to forehead, neither speaking, just breathing in the certainty that after years of ambition, loneliness, and misunderstanding, they had found something that didn't need to be earned. Claire's voice came first, quiet as a prayer. "You know they'll talk again?" "Let them," he said, smiling against her hair. "They talked before, and we survived that." She laughed, wiping her tears. "You make it sound easy. It's not," he said, "but it's right." They kissed not like they had something to prove, but like two people who finally understood what it meant to arrive. Outside, Denver shimmered lights glowing against the dark, traffic humming below, the faint pulse of a city that never quite slept. And in that high apartment above the noise, they stood together, quiet, grounded, whole. The jazz swelled gently again, the piano soft and tender, wrapping the moment like a lullaby. Neither spoke for a long time. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been promised in the way they looked at each other, steady, certain, infinite. 2 years later, the Brown Palace Hotel looked almost the same, chandeliers blazing, marble floors gleaming, violins tuning softly beneath the chatter of Denver's elite. Yet, for those who looked closely, everything had changed. The banners above the entrance no longer read, "The Children's Health Foundation Gala." They read, "The Monroe Bennett Foundation Building, Futures with Dignity." The crowd that filled the ballroom was larger. This time senators, CEOs, educators, nurses, even former patients from children's hospitals across the state. But the energy in the room wasn't just one of wealth or status. It was warmth genuine, shared purpose, a kind of light that came not from chandeliers, but from people believing in something good. At the center of it all stood Claire Bennett Monroe, her navy gown flowing like memory, her presence calm and radiant. The same woman who once entered this room, terrified of whispers, now stood beneath the spotlight as its keynote speaker. Beside her, Ethan Monroe, husband, partner, co-founder, adjusted the microphone before stepping back. His eyes never left her. She smiled at him briefly, a silent thank you, a quiet "we made it" before turning to the crowd. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady but filled with warmth. The microphones carried her tone clearly across the ballroom, every syllable grounded in grace. 2 years ago, this room looked much the same chandeliers, the same silverware, the same conversations, but I was not the same woman. That night, I stood near those doors over there. She gestured gently toward the grand entrance, hoping no one would notice I didn't quite belong. A murmur of recognition rippled through the room. What I learned that evening, Claire continued, was that belonging isn't something granted by invitation. It's something we claim when we stand in our truth, tonight. I stand here not as anyone's assistant, not as anyone's plus one, but as a woman who believes that dignity should never depend on title, income, or circumstance. Applause rose soft at first, then strong and sustained. In the audience, Dr. Elise Harper smiled proudly, her hands folded in quiet satisfaction. Nearby, Lydia Monroe, regal as ever in emerald silk, dabbed discreetly at her eyes. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about optics. She was thinking about her son and the woman who had reminded him how to live. When the applause faded, Claire continued. The Monroe Bennett Foundation was born from a simple idea that technology and compassion can work together to give children a chance not just to survive, but to thrive. In the past year, our programs have reached over 20 hospitals, helping more than 12,000 young patients continue their education while receiving treatment. Each child reminded us what resilience really looks like. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the orchestra waiting in the wings. I used to think impact came from power, she said. Now, I know it comes from partnership, from standing beside someone, not above them. Her gaze found Ethan's across the crowd. And for that lesson, she said softly, I am deeply grateful. Applause thundered again, rising like a tide. Later that night, after the formalities and photo sessions, the ballroom began to breathe again. The orchestra returned with a familiar melody, soft, nostalgic Moon River. Claire stood at the edge of the dance floor, watching as couples swayed under the chandeliers. Ethan approached quietly, the same gentle confidence he had that first night. Déjà vu? He asked, offering his hand. She smiled. Only this time, I'm not hiding behind nerves, and I'm not pretending not to be terrified, he said. They laughed softly and stepped into the dance, moving easily, as though time had rehearsed it for them. The music filled the air, and for a few moments, it felt like the past and present had merged. The young assistant and the lonely CEO now equals partners, whole. Across the room, Marcus Hale approached during a brief interlude, his expression different from the arrogance he'd once worn. Claire, he said, clearing his throat, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about you, about what this all meant. She smiled gently. Thank you, Marcus. That means a lot. He looked to Ethan. You proved us all wrong. You didn't just build a company, you built something better. Ethan extended a hand, and Marcus shook it. When he was gone, Claire looked at Ethan and raised an eyebrow. Was that the apocalypse? He chuckled. Close enough. They returned to the dance floor as Moon River reached its refrain. The chandeliers shimmered. The air felt soft with memory and light. At the edge of the crowd, Lydia Monroe watched her son and daughter-in-law, her fingers resting on a champagne glass. When Ethan glanced her way, she lifted it in silent salute. He smiled back, a peace long overdue passing between them. As the evening drew to a close, the lights dimmed gradually, leaving the room aglow with candlelight. The last notes of the music faded into stillness. Claire rested her head lightly against Ethan's shoulder. His hand found hers firm, certain, the same way he'd held it that first night. Outside, snow began to fall just as it had years ago, soft flakes landing on the hotel's glass awning, melting into the glow of the city beyond. The narrator's voice, gentle and reflective, carried softly into the hush, the night he invited her to a gala. He thought he was filling an empty seat. Instead, he found the missing piece of his soul. The ballroom lights dimmed completely then, leaving only the faint shimmer of their joined hands and the quiet promise of everything they had built together. And as the screen of memory faded to black piano, soft, lingering, the final image was simple two silhouettes beneath the chandelier's dying glow, standing side by side, unafraid of the world's gaze, bound not by chance, but by choice. In the end, this story isn't just about wealth or romance, it's about worth. Ethan Monroe learned that success built on solitude is only half a life, and Claire Bennett reminded us that dignity doesn't depend on where we come from, but on how we carry ourselves when the world is watching. Their journey teaches that true connection begins the moment we stop pretending, when we let kindness, not status, define us. In a society that too often measures people by titles, salaries, and appearances, their love became a quiet protest proof that respect and understanding can bridge even the widest divide. We all have rooms where we feel out of place, moments when we think we don't belong. But sometimes, the most courageous thing we can do is walk in anyway with grace, with purpose, and with our head held high. Because life's greatest transformations don't come from grand gestures, but from simple choices to see others as equals, to lead with compassion, and to never let fear decide who we are. In the end, real love isn't about power or perfection. It's about presence, humility, and the courage to be genuine. Thank you, dear friends. for staying with us through this heartfelt journey of love, dignity, and second chances. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the quiet strength it takes to be kind in an unkind world, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories that celebrate the beauty of ordinary lives and the courage it takes to stay true to yourself. Now, stay tuned because every story we tell is a mirror of the heart.